Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here. Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Carrie.
I'm ready to talk about Thanksgiving.
It truly is my favorite food holiday. I just love all the traditional Thanksgiving dishes. And I love swapping notes with you because I always learn something that I didn't know before.
Same. And I think what we're really trying to do today is, in a way, pare it down for ourselves and for our listeners for a foolproof kind of Thanksgiving, which of course then you can file in, some of your other favorites or your, family favorites or requests or something new that you want to try. But what are the basics that you really want to get right? And we're really going with five, right? Turkey, gravy, mashed potatoes, a green vegetable, and a dessert.
Yeah, and of course, like, we understand stuffing is important. Other dishes are important. Some people don't think it's Thanksgiving without homemade bread rolls. We understand that. But I do think you gotta have turkey, you have to have gravy, you have to have mashed potatoes. You need something green and vibrant to balance it all out. And what's a meal without dessert? So, let's get into it.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
I am really curious what your go-to turkey preparation is.
Well, I think that you're going to laugh because I think my turkey recipe is incredibly simple. And I think it's really easy to follow too. It's really the way that my dad taught me how to make a roast turkey. And it's actually the way that his dad taught him how to make a roast turkey. And I think the funny thing, as someone who really doesn't like a lot of extra equipment, that I want to admit to you is that I have a turkey roaster. I think we've talked about this
Yeah, you
before.
mean just like that deep roasting pan and then there's a little rack that fits into it?
Yeah, but it's its
It's
own
its own
thing. It's like
thing.
you plug it in
Wait.
and,
No. I don't know what you're talking about. You plug it in?
yes, yeah, you plug it in. It's like a slow cooker, but it's bigger and it's for a turkey.
Oh my goodness, I did not know what you were talking about. So you're saying
Really?
it's like a covered device, like it's a pan that has a rack that you put a turkey in, you plug it in, you
Yes.
cover it, and it's like a mini oven?
It's like its own mini oven.
Wow.
And, I was thinking about having this conversation because I think, listen, I thought that you knew what I was talking about, but also, it's important to share with our listeners what this piece of equipment is. And I remember buying my turkey roaster 20 years ago with my dad at Target in Manhattan Beach, California, because I was my parents came out for Thanksgiving and we were hosting, me and my roommate and a couple of other straggler friends. And so my dad was like, "Well, you need a turkey roaster." So we bought one. And I think maybe they're $100. It's the same one that I've had for 20 years. And it really is like a slow cooker. And it plugs in. And my dad, we always went to the Lauritsen side for Thanksgiving. My dad had three brothers and they all had kids. So with them and my grandparents, that was like 20 people. And so I think what my grandparents did, the reason why they had this turkey roaster was that they could roast a big bird and then they could keep the oven free for all the other things that needed to be cooked. And that's what I love about it because it frees up my
'Cause
oven.
then you never have to think about oven space. But I honestly, in my life, have never even seen a turkey roaster. No one has ever mentioned a turkey roaster to me. I truly didn't know it existed until this moment. I'm not kidding, but I love the idea of it. Okay, what is the Lauritsen family turkey recipe?
So the Lauritsen family turkey recipe is basically a turkey and butter and salt. That's all we do. And there have been times when I've made big turkeys and smaller turkeys. It really doesn't matter the size of your turkey. What I like to do is I loosen the skin of the turkey and I stuff pats of butter underneath of the turkey. And I do have a couple of tips for that, which is one, use salted butter. and to use cold butter because then it's a lot less messy, and you can kind of see when you're kind of sort of putting these little squares of butter underneath of your turkey skin. You can see where the coverage is. It's clear there's like a pat of butter in there, and you really want to be generous. And then because I'm a chef and I've cooked professionally for a long time, I also understand that a little extra salt really does go a long way, especially with a very flavorless protein like turkey. So I do add a little bit of salt. And I actually don't add pepper, which I know my dad and my grandfather did, but I feel like pepper can be, as someone who cooked for a lot of families and kids, pepper can be a little tough with kids, you
Well,
know?
kids sometimes think it's spicy. I
Yeah.
think this hot tip of the cold butter is very important because it is hard to put a room temperature butter on a cold bird or even on a room temperature bird. It doesn't slick on that easily, and I feel like you're always seeing chefs using softened butter on birds. So I think you're so right that this idea of just slicing up cold butter, shoving it under the skin, you see where it's evenly spaced out. It's all going to melt anyway. It's a really good tip.
Well, and I'll also say there's a safety piece for me, which is, I've cooked heavy birds before, and a turkey is like, it's unwieldy, right? It's big, it's slippery, and so if your hands are covered in softened butter and you're trying to like move this turkey around, it can just end up on the floor, and I don't want to deal with that. And so, I that's to me that over the years that I've done it and the conversations I've had with my dad about it and watching my grandfather do it, it's like cold butter, pats of butter, more butter the better, and a little bit of salt, and that's it. And one of the things that you mentioned about like a turkey roaster is like a roasting pan, and definitely my you know, separate turkey roaster has a roasting pan. I do not even bother using it usually. I just put a little bit of water or broth in the bottom to kind of create that steam. But I'm not a person who's wanting a burnished turkey generally. I don't care about the skin as much.
Well, because and this is I think probably what you do is what I do. You have to let the turkey rest. And that rest after it's cooked, you have to give it at least 30 minutes of resting time. And I always use that resting time to reheat things in the oven that didn't have space before. I'm like, "Oh, that's a perfect window." But when you're resting a bird, the skin starts to get not crispy, like it settles in, and especially if you loosely tent it, you're going to lose any crispiness anyway. I'd so much rather have a juicy bird than deal with that. Like usually crispy skin to me on a turkey also implies a kind of dry bird.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'm glad that you brought that up because I think, I've gotten to the last couple of years. I know I mentioned this the last couple of years. We go to a big potluck Thanksgiving, and someone fries now turkey legs, and so I kind of get the best of both worlds because I'll get like a slice of really tender, juicy turkey, and I'll add a little bit of gravy to it, and then I can always have like a crispy turkey leg or a crispy piece of turkey which is like fried chicken a little bit. And, and so it's like, what are you looking for? And in this respect, I just think like as much buttery flavor and a little bit of salt, that's all I really need on my turkey.
Well, maybe it comes as no surprise. I have a slightly different take. Partly because I don't own a turkey roaster, although now I really want to invest in one. I do have a turkey roasting pan, like just I got off of some food styling gig, but you could easily use those disposable ones if you didn't have, a stainless steel one. I never use butter because I usually am not mixing meat and dairy in the same meal,
Right.
although Thanksgiving can get a little bit of an exception because sometimes it's a potluck. But the turkey itself, I've never ever used butter. And I have a very specific method that I've always shared with anyone who asks me. And it's just my go to way of doing it. But I think the idea, even without a turkey roaster, is a similar effect. So I also started doing a dry brine, which I know is already gonna sound like a headache to you. You're gonna
Yeah.
be like,
I'm like,
"I'm not
what?
doing
No,
that."
no, no, I'm not doing that.
Okay, I have done a wet brine. That to me feels like way too much work and not worth it. I don't find that it makes sense in the end.
Well, what do you even brine it in? You need, like, a
You need a
giant container if you're brining.
it's so
Who
crazy.
has
I
space? I mean, I have 2 refrigerators, and I still don't even have space for that.
I
It's
barely have
craziness.
space for the turkey usually because I usually get a big bird because I have a huge crowd. But I have found a benefit to dry brining. So, dry brining sounds like a fancy word, but it's really easy. It's salting the bird ahead of time and just leaving it unwrapped in your fridge. So, it kind of airs the skin, it gets in there. It does make a crispier skin if that's what you're looking for. That's not really what I'm looking for. So, I just do a combination of salt and sugar, like mostly salt, like 3/4 salt to 1/4 brown sugar. Sometimes I add something like dried sage or thyme. Sometimes it's just salt and sugar and nothing else. And then I just sprinkle it heavily inside and out, inside the turkey. Whether you're dry brining or not, seasoning inside the turkey is as important as seasoning outside. So I make sure to do that. And I don't do it for days on end. I do it 24 hours before. You could do it several days in advance,
So, like,
but
the
I
day before you're gonna cook it, the day before
yeah,
Thanksgiving.
the day before Thanksgiving. I'm
Yeah.
already in the kitchen the day before Thanksgiving because I like to spread out my prep list over a few days, just makes it easy for me. So it's not like a big deal, and also it kinda makes it feel, like, easier on the day. Like, the bird's ready to go, it's already sitting in its pan because I usually put it in the pan in the fridge to sort of air cure. Okay, that's the prep part. Then I get real crazy with the aromatics. So I'm the opposite of you. I'm a maximalist. I like to put a bed of vegetables below my turkey. I don't even like using the rack. I like to have the turkey sit on a bed of vegetables. And I'll sometimes add apple or I'll sometimes add quince, but I always
Oh, yeah,
have
the
the
quince
quince.
you always add, right? That
I
was a real
do.
revelation. I was like, "What do you do with a quince?" You're like, "I always put it in my turkey."
It makes the most incredible broth, like, when you use those leftovers, because it has this beautiful,
Wow.
like, honey, pineapples, vanilla eve aroma, but not
Stop.
sweet. It's, like, very subtle. So, I do carrot, onion, quince, or apple. You could one year I did all red onions because I think that was something I saw in Smitten Kitchen, and I really like that too. Any kind of aromatic works. Put the bird on top of it. Then I stuff the bird, not with stuffing. I never stuff a bird with stuffing. It's too gross. It's too dangerous. It's not my thing. Also, it gets so soggy. I love a
Yeah.
crispy edge stuffing. So I stuff it with a cut lemon, a cut head of garlic, a bunch of herbs, thyme, rosemary, sage, the classics. Stuff that in the bird. Season with, well, it's already seasoned. Rub it with olive oil usually instead of butter, but you could do any oil or you could do butter. And then I add like a cup or two of water or white wine to the bottom of my pan. Then I tent my pan with foil. Actually, I just cover it all with foil, not tent. I secure it so that there is gonna be a little steaming happening.
Right.
So for me, like, turkeys, you usually estimate about an hour for every 5 pounds when you're cooking a bird at 350. That's sort of the ratio. Some people differ a little, but that's usually what I'm saying. So if you have a 15-pound bird, it will take about 3 hours. So you calculate the estimated time it takes to cook ahead of time. You cover that bird, you stick in the oven at 350, and halfway through the cooking time, then I uncover it. So it gets a good amount of time where like all that moisture and the aromatics in the bird are getting to get juicy. And then I take it off so it gets browned. And I find that creates like a juicy, delicious bird, but also one that looks burnished and beautiful.
Yeah, that looks like it's from a magazine. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe slightly less dark because they always paint those birds, but
Right, right.
but
No.
still, like, burnished, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you brought by the way, I'm impressed that you know, like, how long to cook the turkey. I literally cannot tell you. I'm constantly looking at my phone like, "Wait, how many pounds is this turkey?" Like, I have to remember which one it is because sometimes I also make multiple turkeys because we often host the turkey sandwich day the next day or over the weekend. So I'm always kind of making, like, a bird or 2, like, extra. But I love that you know this. And I also, I forgot to kind of mention that do you ever baste your turkey? I baste mine.
I based mine a little after that initial halfway through the cooking process
Okay.
when I
After
uncover it,
it's
but
steamed.
I'm not meticulous about it. I feel really loose about basting. I also
Yeah.
don't feel like it makes the biggest difference in the world, but it's just sort of a nice way to like check on the bird and see what's going on. And I do think it's worth owning a meat thermometer. I think that's a piece of kitchen equipment that just you will end up using all the time. They cost like $10 for a good digital one. It's worth the investment. We can link one that we like in the show notes so you can find it. And it's better than those little pop up thermometers that come with the bird because you can really test different parts of the bird because they cook differently. So I do
Yeah,
think it's
I
worth it.
I agree. It's a worthy item to have, and I will say, like, it really puts my mind at ease. Again, after someone who's made turkeys many, many, many years in a row, I just need to know that it's hit 165. I just need to
Me
know that,
too.
and because
It I don't want any doubt.
I don't want any doubt, and I also don't wanna bring it to the table and be like, "Oh, wow, that thigh looks a little bit pink," and you're just like, "No." Then it just ruins everything, and then you're stressed. So, if you don't have a meat thermometer, I really think it's a worthy investment, and you can use it like, I'm really trying out making roasted chickens now thanks to you, and I really need it when I do that.
Oh,
So,
yeah, it's so helpful, especially when you're just getting in the flow of it. Okay, we have to talk about gravy, which is connected to turkey. So, gravy for me is a project that starts usually a week before Thanksgiving. To ease my mind to create less stress, I go to the butcher counter. I pick up a bunch of wings and necks. So let's say a couple turkey necks and maybe 3 or 4 wings at most. You could also get just wings. That makes a beautiful stock. I roast those with just salt. Like I salt them, no oil, nothing. I put them in a 350 or 375 oven, roast them till they're golden brown. I plop all of those in a pot with some onions, carrots, celery, and some herbs, but you could do straight up turkey. You don't even need aromatics. You could use veg scraps. You could do whatever you like for your broths. But when in doubt, onion, carrot, celery, garlic, always a go to.
thyme, a little sage.
Thyme,
Yeah.
little sage, bay leaf, whatever herbs you enjoy. You bring that, fill it with water, bring that pot to a simmer it for a whole day. Like I like to make this turkey stock as rich and flavorful as I can, which means a long, slow simmer. A crock pot would be great for this too if you didn't have, if you didn't want to keep it on your stove, or you could do it Carrie style, stick it in your oven overnight. That would
Yes.
be delicious at 250 in your oven in the pot overnight. Then you have this beautiful turkey stock that's rich and delicious, and it's ready for Thanksgiving Day. I tuck that in the freezer or the fridge, depending how far in advance I'm making it. It lasts for about a week in the fridge. So you just calculate based on that. Then on the day, I take drippings from the turkey, the fat from the turkey that's cooked. You can make this during that 30-minute resting time when your turkey's just sitting there resting, or you could scoop out a little bit of the drippings as it's cooking and you throw that into a pan with a little added fat. Sometimes, like butter is a classic. You could use oil, you could use non dairy butter, and and an equal amount of flour. So if it's like 3 tablespoons of fat, I always estimate you do 3 tablespoons of flour, equal flat and flour. Flour. You whisk that constantly until it's
'Cause
sort
you
of
wanna get the
starting to
lumps
brown.
out.
You want to get
Yes.
the lumps out, and you want to have the flour cook a little. You don't want
Yes.
that raw flour taste. And while that's happening, you've been heating up your stock because this is the other thing. It's like it's very helpful to have hot liquid go into this flour fat mixture, which is called a roux. It just helps it become a smoother, non lumpy gravy. And so then you drizzle in that warm stock that you made a week ago into your drippings and your flour, and you whisk, whisk, whisk. And that's the base of the gravy. And then I let it just kind of simmer and thicken for, 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah, and you just wanna, taste and adjust the seasonings, like add some salt and pepper if it needs it. If you're an herbaceous person, you can add some sage, some fresh sage and thyme, and even rosemary if you like those flavors. You can kind of keep it very like minimalist. But yeah, it's funny. I do basically the same thing. And I will admit there have been years when I have not had turkey stock on hand and I didn't like think to make it or it just didn't happen. And the homemade chicken broth that I generally always have in my freezer works perfectly too. Like it's
Oh, yeah.
it's less of that turkey, sort of deep, rich turkey flavor, which you really do, I feel like I want personally on Thanksgiving. But I think you can also give yourself a little break if you didn't have a chance to do this. Like the chicken stock works great too.
Yeah, you could just use the drippings and some you could even buy store-bought turkey stock if you have to, because if you add some fresh sage and thyme, it will make it taste like homemade. Okay, I have one last gravy question. So sometimes I add a splash of vinegar at the end, like a sherry vinegar or apple cider vinegar, I think is really nice, especially if I use quince because like that fruity element. Do you add cream to your gravy or any dairy?
I've never added cream or dairy to my
Okay.
gravy, never. And it's funny, I've never thought I don't know that I've ever added a little bit of, like, vinegar.
I just think it brightens it a little, like a splash
Yeah.
of acidity, sometimes even like a little squeeze of lemon. I like it, but not a lot, just a very subtle drop.
Yeah, I love that. That's a by the way, that's a great tip. Well, Sonia, I'm excited to move on to mashed potatoes because I have a very hot tip that I wanna offer to you.
Great. I can't wait to hear it because mashed potatoes are kind of my Achilles heels sometime. They just always
Really?
feel like really well, I just feel like they're arduous. They don't always taste good reheated. They're just kind of this thing that I'm like, I'm already spending all this time on so many dishes. I have to also make the perfect mashed potatoes. I don't know why. It's my personal Achilles heel at Thanksgiving.
Well, I will say I used to share your sentiment, and I always felt like there is a lot of when I was learning to be a cook, there are a lot of articles about how like you can't reheat your mashed potatoes or how they you have to make them so perfectly and otherwise they get lumpy and all this stuff. And so I always thought like gravy, you're supposed to make your mashed potatoes kind of like in this 30-minute period, which kind of feels like Top Chef or something. It's like this
Yes.
it's like a race to the end, like you're at like mile 22 of 20, like of a marathon. You're like you're right at the end, but it's so stressful. And I don't like it to be stressful. I mean, there's just a minimal amount of stress that just happens around that time. So a few years ago, we hosted Thanksgiving, and my friend Keely was coming with her husband Clayton, and she said, "What can I bring?" And I said, "Well, what do you like to make?" I like to kind of give people like, what are they good at? And she said, "Well, I'm really good at mashed potatoes." And I was like, done and done. How great. Like, you're really
Perfect
saving
guest.
me.
Yeah.
Perfect guest. So, what the revelation was that Keely made mashed potatoes ahead of time and brought them to my house. And they were the best mashed potatoes I've ever had in my life. And and since then, I've always made mashed potatoes this way. And so I will say I did call her this week to kind of go through. This is usually when I'm going to make them. It's been a few months, so I usually call her to go through the recipe again, but now I'm capturing it here for all of us. And so what she offered was, she learned this from her mom, and you want to use a potato that's like a russet or a Yukon Gold, or her mom recommends, she's from Texas, so they have these red potatoes, and those are the potatoes that
Wow.
she always uses.
I would
So,
never ever use a red potato. That's sort of very interesting to me.
but is that a potato in Texas that's more like a russet? I don't know because there's so many different varieties of potatoes.
But usually red potatoes are like standard one of the 3 across the country. I mean, I'm sure it works. So again, like I could be
Because
proven
isn't a red
wrong.
well, red potatoes are usually like the more waxy ones, right? And you
Yes, they're
want
usually
a more
waxier and you
starchy.
that's why russets are ideal because 'cause they're so fluffy.
Yes, they're so fluffy. Well, she uses a red potato, and I gotta say, they're delicious.
Sure.
Um, and then you kind of do all the basics. You peel your potatoes. She usually quarters them. One of her tips is you put the potatoes in the water, and then you put the water on to boil. So you're not putting the
Yes.
potatoes into hot boiling water, which makes sense to me if you're
That
using.
is actually a key step for mashed potatoes. You to get the best texture, you must start with cold water. I absolutely do the same.
Okay, great. Well, then she's right on point. There you go. And then you boil them until they're fork tender. And she even acknowledged that, like, I really kind of like them to be sort of falling apart. And then you drain them in a colander. And while they're draining, you want to, or even before you're getting ready to take them off, you want to heat your butter, a lot of butter, and milk. And, I said, well, don't you use cream? And she said, I just kind of use whatever milk is like in my fridge. So, you know, 2% whole milk, cream, half and half, whatever you want in your mashed potatoes. But that is one of the major keys is hot milk and hot and warm butter. Like you
It
want that.
makes a huge difference. And I do just say any milk works, but I don't think skim milk works. But I do think 2% whole or half and half or even cream, but it's so true. I was gonna say the same thing. When I make great mashed potatoes, the best versions, I've heated the milk and butter together before I add it.
Yeah, and she even said, like, "I have made the mistake before where I, even kind of at the end after she's heated the milk and the butter and, and mashed them all together, she'll think like, "Oh, I want a little bit more milk," and she'll splash some of that cold milk in, and she says it doesn't work that way. So that's a good thing to remember, like, don't get if you're doing this for the first time, if you've got a bunch of people in your kitchen at Thanksgiving, just don't freak out. Just like keep some warm milk there in case you need it, because that would be my thing. I would just grab the cold milk and pour it in there. Um, and then she uses a hand mixer. And I will say I grew up with a hand mixer. My mom had a hand mixer for, like, making cookies and things. I do not own a hand mixer, so I would just use, like, a masher. Do you use a potato masher? What do you
Yeah,
use?
I have a potato masher, that's usually what I use, but I love the idea of using a hand mixer. I don't know if on Thanksgiving I'm gonna bust it out because it would just feel like another thing to deal with, but I think that's a good tip. It would probably make it so creamy and smooth.
Yeah. And then the other thing, there's a couple other things she mentioned, and I completely agree with her on this. I think potatoes can really take a lot of salt. So, like, if you're someone who feels like you undersalt food, just like be really liberal with the salt. They can take a lot. She adds a lot of pepper. It adds some nice, like, balance to all that, milk and butter. And then she said there have been times when she's mixed sour cream in, or she's mixed in a little bit of garlic, like the way that you do your vegetable mash, where you grate garlic on a microplane and put a little bit of raw garlic in. That adds a nice flavor. I would not do that for Thanksgiving. I wouldn't do either of those things. Would you?
I've done garlic grated into my mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving. I've also taken cloves of garlic and put them in the milk and butter as it's warming and
Oh,
let it
that's a good tip.
gently infuse. And I also sometimes add a sprig of thyme to that milk. And sometimes, if I'm not doing thyme, I'll do a very subtle grating of nutmeg, just the subtlest wisp of it because I don't want it to taste like nutmeg. But again, all these like subtle infusions just add a little bit of depth. I like also to grate to add the freshly ground black pepper to the milk as well because you're blooming the spice. It's like seeping
Yes.
into the milk. So it's like if I'm going to use flavor and I'm going through the step of heating up my butter and my milk, that's where I'm adding all those flavors aside from the salt. The salt goes straight into the water when you boil the potatoes so that infuses it as it's boiling. And then I add even more salt once it's out because you just do need a lot of salt to make it taste like restaurant quality mashed potatoes.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a couple of other things that I just want to add that she added for me, which is like, do this whole process from start to finish. Don't get distracted and do something else, or don't cook your potatoes and then, let them cool off too much before you start this process. She's like, just do it all from start to finish. And what she mentioned too is that, like, oftentimes, like when she was coming to my Thanksgiving, she made this before she walked out the door, and she brought them in like a cast iron, enameled cast iron, like a Le Creuset, and that they held their heat, so they didn't really need to be reheated. I have also done it where I have reheated them, and they do need a little bit more gentle reheating. So if you make these a day ahead of time, then what I like to do is I like to bring them out of the fridge, let them come to room temperature, and then more gently reheat them, whether that's in a Le Creuset or just a casserole, a Pyrex dish that's like covered with tinfoil.
What I learned about reheating mashed potatoes that I do employ at Thanksgiving is to put them in essentially a double boiler. So you put them in a heat proof bowl on a pan of simmering water, pot of simmering water, and you gently reheat them once they've gotten out of the fridge. Like I agree with you, let them come up to room temp. And then I keep a little warm milk or something on the side if you need to dilute them, because you usually do if it's made ahead of time because they've reabsorbed that moisture. And that gentle simmer, you can keep that on the lowest setting while you're doing all these other things and they just sit there. That has been my strategy. I will say the best mashed potatoes I make are not with a masher, and I've never tried a hand mixer, so I'm not sure about that. I swear by a ricer. Called a ricer. It's a like a device where you put the potato in and you squeeze it through. It's almost like a Play-Doh device. It looks so fun,
Yes.
and it is fun. And I have to say, it makes such a difference with mashed potatoes. It really is that secret piece of equipment that makes the fluffiest mashed potatoes. And again, the right ratio of dairy. So you want a heavy amount of butter and milk to any kind of potato for Thanksgiving. That is the secret. There's no shortcut. But I think whether you're using a handheld mixer or ricer, it is all that creaminess that makes that incredible whipped mash and the texture you want.
Other thing I would also add that she added too was like the highest quality ingredients, right? So she usually uses like Kerrygold butter. I like to keep Strauss on hand, which is a California brand that I really like. But I think like whatever high quality salted butter that you can be adding into these mashed potatoes is better.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Opt in for the good ingredients, especially at special occasions. Carrie, I think the thing about Thanksgiving, though, and that I hear other people critique Thanksgiving for, people who don't like it, is that it's all kind of one note. It's a lot of starchy, a lot of rich, like we've just described, a lot of sort of sweet dishes. If you're having sweet potatoes or squash, then you're having pies. So I think vegetables are a critical element on the plate. And it's where I like to have the most fun. I like to keep certain things classic, like the turkey and the mashed potatoes, but I like to veer in totally radical directions every Thanksgiving. And this Thanksgiving, I know exactly what I want to make. And I've been wanting to make it for months, ever since I read this recipe in the Tender Heart Cookbook by Hetty Louie McKinnon. And it's a gochujang glazed Brussels sprout.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm excited to hear about this.
Okay, so full disclosure, this won't work for kids. I don't think, unless they love spicy food. But I think that's also okay to have a very adult dish at the table, and maybe you have an extra veg for your kids as well. But I think that having something spicy and deeply flavorful and green is just going to help balance out all this richness. So it's a very simple recipe, but there are some techniques that help. You cut your Brussels sprouts in half. You put them face down on your sheet pan, like a roasting pan, whatever, sheet pan. You roast them, I think at 400 for 10 or 15 minutes. So you get them nice and brown. And at this point, it's just like oil, salt, and pepper, nothing else. While they're roasting, you mix a very quick gochujang marinade or sauce, which is that gochujang, Korean red pepper, fermented Korean red pepper paste. You add some sesame oil, some tamari or soy sauce, some maple syrup, some rice vinegar, and some grated garlic or minced garlic. You whisk that together. That takes like 5 seconds. That's not a difficult sauce. Then, after the Brussels sprouts have roasted and start to brown, you get them out, you drizzle them and toss them in the sauce, and you put them back in the oven for another 8 to 10 minutes. So they get deeply glazed and burnished, but that sauce doesn't burn and get too caramelized. That's why you add them later. And then you top them with sesame seeds at the end with fresh cilantro. She even says dollops of yogurt. I think there's a lot of different fresh toppings you could add. But I think these would be beautiful to make ahead, serve at room temperature. I don't think they have to be hot. I think that glaze is just going to make these Brussels sprouts have so much umami and so much flavor and really add excitement to that plate.
Yeah, they're really gonna stand out and sort of break up all of those starchy things because I think what I'll also add is, like, most of my plate is mashed potatoes. That's, like, my favorite thing to have. And my friend Lauren also makes really amazing mac and cheese. So this is kind of the day where my plate is a lot of starch, and I do love some of these green vegetables. I will say mine is maybe a little bit more on the basic side too, but it would fit well if you wanted to make, these great Brussels sprouts for the adults. And then this is maybe even more like of a kid friendly or just like a general population friendly dish. I love to have a green bean on my
Yeah.
table. And I think for here, especially, we can still get green beans that are tender. And I think you can still kind of get them around the country that are still tender. So the most tender green beans that you can get, I like to blanch them. And then I just make like a lemon, garlic, maybe a little bit of mustard vinaigrette to put on them. But what I really like adding is a nut. And, when I have come to visit you in Portland, I've come home with those amazing toasted hazelnuts. And
The
the
Freddy Guy
Freddy guy,
hazelnuts.
they're so incredible, and I keep them in my freezer, and I just love that flavor. I think it's unexpected. I don't know that everyone cooks with hazelnuts, or maybe the people in Oregon do because, you're the biggest producer, right, of hazelnuts in the country?
It's true, Oregon produces the most hazelnuts or filberts, as
Yes,
they're also
filberts.
called, in North America. There's a tremendous amount, and the trees are beautiful. But, yeah, we add the hazelnuts to almost anything, and I know where this is going because I do the same thing, so I'm excited to hear that you're using hazelnuts in your green beans.
They're so delicious, but I do have, like, a hot tip, which is so the recipe one of the recipes I found online that really kind of follows what I do, actually kind of wants you to serve them at room temp or they want you to serve them warm. And so, they call for either like beef fat or butter. And I will say, I think that a vegetable is a place where you really want to go room temperature. You don't want to be stressed out about this. This is not like a green bean casserole that you do want to serve hot. So I think like definitely use olive oil in this. And I would not recommend using butter, even though I really like this as a buttery holiday. I think butter at room temperature is actually not that great because it
Congeals.
congeals and it's not great. So just remember that whatever vegetable that you're doing, you really, if you're going to serve it at room temperature, do not use butter. Just use olive oil. It's the easiest to do.
That's such an important tip. I am 100% with you on this entire recipe. I make something almost identical, so it's so nice to hear what you're doing. I think the mustard vinaigrette is important. I sometimes don't do that and I'm like, this dish is a little bland with just, lemon, olive oil, and hazelnuts. I think adding a mustard into a sauce, into vinaigrette, would add that extra flavor that I'm sometimes missing when I make green beans at Thanksgiving. But everything you said is so similar to what I wanna do and what I love, and so I'm so glad you reminded me of that. So, Thanksgiving is not complete without dessert, and I think you have to sort of play to your crowd. Some people require pumpkin pie, some people require apple pie, but I like to have an ample dessert spread. So I'll keep the classics for the guests that I know are looking for that. And then I always like to make something that's a little bit different. And one of the things I keep circling back to year after year is this recipe that was first published in Bon Appetit probably about 10 years ago. It's a recipe for cranberry lime pie by Anne Redding and Matt Danzer. It's sort of like a cranberry curd, essentially, pie, or like a key lime pie vibe, but with cranberries and limes. And it's so stunning. It's one of the most gorgeous pies I've ever made, and it has so much flavor. One of the things that makes it delightful for Thanksgiving is it's one of those easy cookie crusts. So you buy ginger snaps, which adds so much flavor, and you can even get really good gluten-free ginger snaps. Like that's a cookie. There's always a gluten-free variety, and I usually get that for the guests who need that. And so you just take a bag of ginger snaps, you add some butter, melted butter, and a little sugar, and you pulse that together. And then you do a crust like you would a graham cracker crust. So already that makes it easy. You bake that for 10 minutes. You don't have to worry about chilling dough or any of that. While that's baking and then cooling, you make your filling, which is essentially a cranberry curd. It starts by making a very simple cranberry sauce with cranberries and sugar. You blend that up, you puree that, and then you add eggs, egg yolk, lime juice, lime zest, and finally butter to make this glossy curd. You pour that into the ginger snap pie shell and you chill that for 2 hours minimum. But typically I make this up to, a day or 2 days in advance. The other thing that makes this so stunning is it tells you how to make candied cranberries, which I just love cranberry anything. I'm cranberry obsessed, but candied cranberries are just the most beautiful garnish and they're so easy to make. All you need to do is boil some sugar with water, make a simple syrup, like equal parts sugar and water. You throw some cranberries in there for just a few minutes. You take them out, you let them, sort of solidify in their syrup on a rack or just on a plate, and then you roll them in sugar. And in this case, sugar with a little lime zest. And so they look like these glossy, sparkly jewels. So you garnish the pie with these candied cranberries, and people just love it. It's just so festive. It's also great for like a Christmas party or for Christmas in general. But at Thanksgiving, the acidity and brightness of a cranberry pie I think is so welcome, especially if you're also serving it with a pumpkin pie or, something a little starchier like a sweet potato pie. It's just so lovely.
I mean, I am so sold on this idea. I think you've mentioned this in a previous episode too. Maybe in our cookie episode when Shannon Sarna was talking about like a cranberry cookie that she makes, and you mentioned this dessert. And so I'm so glad to hear, that you're offering this. It's like a beautiful piece. It's a beautiful part of your dessert, assortment. And that I think that it kind of goes back to the idea of like the gochujang in the Brussels sprouts or the Dijon mustard in the green beans. It has this like it perks up your palate on this day that there's just a lot of like one note flavors, right? And so this is like
Exactly.
an exciting piece. Like I feel like I would take a little bit of apple pie, a little bit of pumpkin pie, and a little bit of this cranberry dessert, and this would be it would be a perfect ending to a meal.
Like a
um
holy trinity of Thanksgiving desserts.
yes. Well, I will say I am bringing the pumpkin pie because that's something that my family really really loves, and I love what you just offered about your cranberry lime pie because I also, instead of making a pie crust, I make a graham cracker crust. And it really takes so much stress out of it for me because even though
Yeah.
I am capable of making a pie crust, I actually don't love it. I definitely don't love it as much as you do. And so this is just a way that I give myself like a little bit of a break. And I honestly always just follow Martha Stewart's recipe, which is very, very simple. It's like sugar, cornstarch, a little bit of spices, a pumpkin puree, or you can use canned. I have done both, and I honestly think the canned makes it a little bit more uniform. No one ever notices whether it's like fresh or from a
It
can.
has to be Libby's canned pumpkin, though. I
Yes,
have to say, Libby's
agreed.
canned pumpkin is the only acceptable canned pumpkin, and I do think it's better than homemade pumpkin. I've made both. I think Libby's is a little better.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And the one difference that I usually make is I don't know why Martha's recipe calls for light brown sugar, but I just believe if you're going to use brown sugar, I just always use dark. It just has like more caramely flavor. And I think you want that in this recipe. And I will say my family loves the graham cracker crust. I always add a little bit more salt into it. So it's like this salty sweet, you know, balance. And I just think no Thanksgiving is complete without a pumpkin pie. And certainly my family thinks that way. So, this is just a way that I can make a pie that I actually don't have to make a pie crust for.
I love that hot tip, and I think, graham cracker crust with pumpkin actually goes really well together flavor-wise. In terms of Martha's filling recipe, so she has you do regular sugar and brown sugar and the regular pumpkin spices and eggs, I'm assuming. Does she have you add some kind of cream or condensed what kind of dairy does she have you add?
This is what I also love about it too, is it calls for evaporated milk. And as we know, that's the milk in a can. It's always in my pantry. I usually buy it in like September so that I know it's in my pantry. And what's great about the evaporated milk and also about the Libby's, canned pumpkin is that uniformity and that process actually just makes for like a really creamy pumpkin pie. It just then and it's the consistency is there, the creaminess is there, and that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, same. And that depth of the spice and the caramel notes from the brown sugar. I love that. I love a good classic pumpkin pie. And it's good to know that this recipe works well because I'm always uncertain. I'm like, should I just follow the can? Should I try Smitten Kitchen? There's so many pumpkin pie recipes. And I just love knowing that Martha's is foolproof, tried and true, and make it easy with a graham cracker crust. These are all such helpful tips. I am so in the mood to start cooking for
Me
Thanksgiving. I
too.
really am.
Yeah, me too. I'm really, all those smells and all that warmth in your kitchen and allowing if you can kind of make these basics and you're having people come, then they can bring the dishes that are comforting to them, but you're sort of providing like a a pretty basic canvas for people to start from.
Oh, that's a really good point because something like a stuffing is a great thing to assign to guests. And so all these things that are missing, like a casserole or a stuffing or cream corn or any of those things that people love, that's such a great thing to ask someone to bring if they love to make it. So, yeah, I kind of know what I'm going to outsource this year too.
Yeah, me too. Well, I'm really excited and I'm so glad we had this conversation.
Same. Until next time.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.